Salve discipuli. This is help for your Latin studies in Henle First Year Latin, exercise number 263. In this exercise, we are asked to give the correct form of the relative pronoun in each of the sentences given. Before we do, let's make sure that you understand the information that was just given as we entered into lesson 24, talking about relative clauses and using, you'll see here, qui, que, and quod. In English, the relative pronouns are words like who, which, or that, and it introduces a subordinate adjective clause. If you're in classical conversations and have participated in essentials, this is like your who, which clause, and so that should be pretty familiar to you. So you have a main clause, right? The Gaul who was in the camp was a slave. The main clause is the Gaul was a slave. And the subordinate clause is who was in the camp, right? And the who is referring to the Gaul. Here it says, those who fight bravely do not always win. Your main clause is those do not always win, and the subordinate clause is who fight bravely. And again, who is referring back to those. Okay, so these subordinate clauses are adjective clauses because, like an adjective, they describe a noun. Gaul, who was in the camp, right? This whole clause is describing the Gaul. Okay, so on the next page, it gives you again several examples in English and then in Latin. The thing to remember is that the antecedent, okay, it says here, it must agree with its antecedent in gender and number. And then it gets its case from its own clause. So it's not always going to be the subject like these examples. The case could be different depending on where that relative pronoun, how that relative pronoun functions in the subordinate clause. But that's the rule to remember. The relative pronoun gets its gender and number from the antecedent. In other words, the word to which it refers. This is the antecedent of who is Gaul. So it gets gender and number from Gaul, and then it gets the case from its own clause. In this one, who was your subject, so nominative case. Okay, with that in mind, let's take a look at a couple of the exercises for 263. It gives us the sentence in English, and then it gives us most of the sentence in Latin, asking us to fill in the relative pronoun that's missing. So sentence number 1 reads, Caesar, who was a great general, conquered the Gauls. So again, we have a main clause, Caesar conquered the Gauls, right? And then we have a subordinate clause, who was a great general. And that relative pronoun who refers to Caesar, right? This is describing Caesar. So it's going to get its gender and number from the antecedent, Caesar, which is masculine singular. And it's going to generate the case from its own clause, who was a great general. Well, in this clause, the word who is the subject, so it will be in the nominative case. So with that information, we can come to our Latin translation. Kaiser blank imperator magnus fuit Gallos vicet. We just need to fill in the relative pronoun that would fit according to these attributes: masculine, singular, nominative. So looking at Rule 139, masculine, singular, nominative is qui. Caesar qui imperator magnus fuit Gallos vicet. All right, let's look at one more. The Gauls, whose leaders Caesar killed, were not friends of the Romans. So we have our main clause, the Gauls were not friends of the Romans. And we have our subordinate clause, whose leaders Caesar killed. This one's going to take a little bit of reorganizing in our brains to understand the case. But first of all, let's just recognize that this is our relative pronoun, whose, and it is referring back to the Gauls leaders, right? So the Gauls is a masculine plural antecedent. So we want our relative pronoun to be masculine plural. And the case, this is where we have to think about the order or the noun jobs of these in this subordinate clause. If we reorder this as a subject, verb, whatever, we would see that the subject is Caesar, the verb is killed. Caesar killed whose leaders? Caesar killed leaders of whom, right? So Caesar is the subject, killed is the verb. What did he kill? The leaders. And we're answering the question whose, right? This is showing possession of whom. So this case is actually genitive, whose. So when we go to fill in the blank here in our Latin translation, we want to look for the correct form as a masculine plural genitive relative pronoun. So here again we have masculine, plural, and then genitive, quorum. And that's how you would do that. So continue through these sentences to consider the gender, number, and case of the relative pronouns where you would fill in the blank, remembering that the gender and number comes from the antecedent and the case comes from its own clause. I hope this has been helpful to you. Have a great day.